spent many years working at YouTube in their marketing department. I learned so much there about how to make online video look good. From the lights to the camera to the mics, I got all of that set up here in my San Francisco apartment. So I was like, you know what? Might as well put it to good use for this presentation. So if you're open to it, I wanted to try something new. I wanted to actually go to my computer, and so what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna move myself here. I'm gonna start the presentation here. And that way you can see me, my facial expressions, me pointing to different things on the screen, as well as the actual contents of the presentation, so you get as much value as possible as we all try to adapt to this new normal and still reach millions of people with our messages this year and beyond. So probably, if you've been a lot like me, you've been Zooming so much that even your dreams have been in Zoom, like this cartoon, which is one of my favorites from this past year. And I think one question I keep asking myself is, what can we learn from the past to help prepare us to navigate the future? And if I had to rewind the clock back to 1941, I'd say that was another year to remember because of a lot of the changes that happened then. Our country, of course, was on the heels of the Great Depression, just coming out of it. And there's a lot of things that our businesses were going through that I think we could learn from. So I want you for a second, just imagine it's the year 1941, and imagine you're sitting in front of what is one of the first TVs to be out on the market, one of the first color TVs, and you're flipping through and you see some sitcoms on there, you flip through again, you see FDR, who's giving a speech, and you're like, oh, I don't have time for politics right now. And then you come across a baseball game, and the Philadelphia Phillies and the Brooklyn Dodgers are playing one another, and the inning ends, and all of a sudden the screen goes black. Now, what you're about to witness here is the world's very first commercial that aired in 1941 during this baseball game. And as you watch this, I want you to just think about the missed opportunity, because I kid you not, this ad is so underwhelming for the world's first commercial. So I'm just gonna go ahead and play it, and then we can talk about it.
America runs on Bulova time.
That was it. Bulova watches took a 10-second spot in between this baseball game to run the world's first ever commercial. And essentially what they did was they took their same exact radio ad and put it on TV with a voiceover and just that static image there. And if I could just make this interactive for a moment, take a wild guess at how much that commercial cost. If you had to just think for a moment, maybe jot it down on a pen and paper in front of you. Was that ad $90,000? Do you think it was $9,000, $900, or just $9? I'll give you a minute just to think about it, or a second just to think about it, because the answer is $9. That ad, that was one of the first commercial, was the first commercial to air in 1941 in the entire broadcasting industry, was only $9. And as I mentioned, the big missed opportunity there was that they just thought about the past in terms of, let me just take this radio ad, the execs at Bulova watches thought, and let's just put that on TV and it'll be fine. We'll just take what's working for us on radio and we'll put it on TV as we see this paradigm shift in our industry, as the country comes out of the Great Depression, we'll be fine. And as Bulova watches, who was the market leader at that time in watches, did that, there's another upstart watch company who looked at this new medium and this new opportunity of television and said, you know what, we could do better, we could innovate. And that new watch company was called Rolex. You may have heard of it. And if I had to give you a very simple pop quiz, which brand is worth more today, Bulova or Rolex? Obviously, it would not be Bulova, it would be Rolex. And it's because Rolex is now worth over $8 billion, whereas Bulova, $250 million. Not a lot. It's not a tiny amount, but it's certainly not a lot if you consider Bulova being the market leader in 1941 and Rolex just coming out of nowhere and being so much further ahead today. And I think if there's one thing we could learn is that when you ask people in 1941 what America runs on, they'd say Bulova, right? They had such a lead. But today America says they run on Dunkin'. And that just goes to show how much they squandered the opportunity, because in 1941, the same is true for right now in 2020, which is that change is the only constant. And the internet is replacing TV like TV replaced radio. Because again, 2020 has been an accelerant of so many things, and in really taking our messaging and our marketing online is how we're going to take advantage of this moment as we try to pivot our business and our messaging, especially when it comes to taking advantage of all the changes that are happening. So The big question in this presentation I want you to ask yourself is, are you going to be the next Bulova or the next Rolex? And my goal here is to help you be the next Rolex. Because in my experience, Inc. magazine ran this wonderful feature where they said if anybody's cracked the code on going viral, it's Jon Youshaei. I've worked at YouTube, I've worked at Instagram, I've been a cartoonist who has seen his work go viral on different platforms such as LinkedIn. This is one of my cartoons that I wrote that got 96,000 likes, if you can see it over there. And in fact, this spread so much on the internet that the CEO of Zappos, Tony Shake, actually commissioned me to draw one of these cartoons on their Zappos headquarters. So if you go there, you'll see one of these cartoons hanging, 4 of them actually commissioned me to do 4 across the offices. Again, just goes to show, like, being at Instagram, being at YouTube, doing these cartoons on LinkedIn, I've learned the ins and outs of these different platforms. I've also written for Forbes and Time magazine, had several of my articles cross 1.5 million views. And this is not to say that I've had some history or leg up in this. I'm a kid of immigrants. Both my parents are Iranian Jews who came here with very little, and I had to learn all these things with no connection or no prior knowledge. And that's why today I want to share many of those learnings with you, because what my promise is for everyone who's watching this, for every single one of you who's watching this, is that I promise to make everything you learn in this presentation actionable as opposed to academic and theoretical, because I want you to walk away from this presentation to take action on it. And that's what I want to emphasize with the second point. It's not someday, it's tomorrow, it's today that you could actually implement this. And lastly, you don't have to be Kim Kardashian to be able to implement it. You don't have to have a huge following. You don't have to have a huge budget. A lot of these things are going to be about how can we take advantage of this moment to make sure you guys get ahead no matter what your goals are as the CMOs and VPs of your organization. So let me dive into the first tip, which is one of my favorite. And tip number 1 is to remember to E.A.T. And while I put that image of this chipmunk there eating, this point isn't about eating at all. It's about E.A.T. as a shorthand to remember something very important. And before I talk about what that is, I want to talk about what I've seen in all my experience as a marketing manager, which is there's so many great products that go unnoticed. There's too many great videos that go unwatched. There's so many great emails that go unopened. And there's many great articles that go unread. So no matter how you're trying to market, I think even when you have a good product or a good end result, a lot of people won't even give it the time of day if you're not thinking about how to package it properly and thinking about how to get somebody's attention. Because even if you have a quality end result or you have a quality piece of content, you got to make sure we grab their attention. And one of the best ways to do that is with the headline. In my experience, I've had a chance to work with a lot of big celebrities, a lot of big brands, a lot of big creators, but nobody has, there's few experiences that have taught me as much as when I spent time with BuzzFeed. Because if you look at this wall right here of all these Post-it notes, this is actually how they start their brainstorming process. And you may think this is them thinking about, okay, what are all the ideas we could do for an article, or this is fleshing out an article. But no, this is them writing different headline ideas, and that's where they start. If something doesn't have a great headline, then they're not really going to devote as many resources to developing that article, that newsletter, that video, because if the headline can't grab people's attention, then it's going to be hard for them to actually read the article, which is going to make hard to justify the investment in that article or that piece of content marketing. And so I was just so fascinated by the fact that they started with the headline first and then the actual piece of content, whereas I think most marketers start with a piece of content and then they're like, okay, I'm going to think about the headline last. Just think about, like, if you ever written a blog post or if you're ever writing a social media post, you typically start out with the body of it and then you think about, okay, what's the opening line that's going to get people? And I want to encourage you to think about the opposite. Think about BuzzFeed in terms of how much they've been able to adapt and get people to come to their site and read their articles. And if I had to make this even clearer and look back in history, I think people talk about, oh, BuzzFeed may be clickbaiting this and that, but actually this idea of getting people to open a message and headline and think about a good headline has been going on for years. Just take a look at this newsletter from a few decades ago, where is one of the most successful business newsletters. Because why? Because they would take their headlines and put it on the top of the envelope. Whereas most of the competitors and most people today, they put their envelopes out there with nothing on the side. It's just a normal white envelope. They said what never to eat on an airplane. I don't know about you, but that is something that I would open even today if I got that in the mail as a newsletter. So again, people think about their headlines as an afterthought. People not thinking about what to put on their envelopes. Even in the past, look at these like ads from the 1920s. This is one of the most successful ads that ran in print. I believe it ran for over 10 years. It's from the US Music School. And just look at it. It's another headline. They laughed when I sat down at the piano, but when I started to play, right? It's just intriguing you and getting you started. So I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, how can we come up with those headlines on a reliable and consistent basis, knowing that that's the key to getting people to pay attention to whatever you may have on the other side of that headline or that subject line. If you're crafting an email, if you're crafting a line of copy that goes on your website, is trying to grab people's attention to then read the subtext and the paragraph, it all comes down to this shorthand that speaks to this tip here, which is E.A.T. Remember to eat. And what I mean by that is E stands for end result that your customer wants. A stands for addressing any objections they may have. T stands for the time period they get it in. And I know that sounds like a lot, but I want to give a few examples to hopefully clarify this and really make this as clear as possible. So I took these three areas, the E.A.T, along with what they stand for, and I want to just give an example here. So let's say you want to write an article about helping people speak French. That's the end result they want, and addressing their objections. Maybe you're talking to students. This is a hypothetical example. Maybe it's like your Rosetta Stone in this case. I can't afford a teacher, and the time period they'll get it in is 1 month, right? So E is the end result. They want to speak French. You're going to teach them how to speak French, as long as like the article or whatever the piece of content can actually deliver on that, or your product. Addressing their objections, they say, oh, maybe I can't afford a teacher, but I still want to speak French, and the time period they'll get it in is 1 month. So how do we take these different components, the E, A, and T, and come up with a great headline that will get people to click? Well, here's three ways to do it, and let me just move myself here to the side. So how to learn French in 1 month without a tutor. Do you see I took the E, T, and A, combined them, and now you have this headline, how to learn French in 1 month without a tutor. You can even just take two components, not just three. The E and A, 10 ways to learn French for free. Taking the E, the end result, and then I can't afford a teacher for free, kind of addresses that objection. And then lastly, I took the A, E, and T out of order, and I said, no tutor, no problem. Here's how to learn French in 1 month, right? So the E, A, and T. I want to provide another example. So let's say you're thinking about like, the content has to do with helping people get an amazing job. And the objection they may have is like, well, I want to get a good job, but I don't have good experience. And I need to get this job ASAP because, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I just got laid off. These may be the things that this customer or this reader is having. These thoughts are being had in their mind. So the way we use this template, the E.A.T, to come up with the different headlines that would get people's attention is how to get an amazing job without much experience. I literally took the E, A, and A and made the headline out of that. Or take the E and T and you could do how to get a dream job after graduation, right? And then the last one is taking the E and A and just saying the secret to getting hired without a degree, right? But I want to say first and foremost, that's not true, because most people don't realize that there is a Venn diagram to why things get more attention than other. And what most people don't realize is that Venn diagram is made up of culture on one side and industry on the other. I just want to see if I can use this pointer. So culture and industry. And then most people, most companies, most brands are here, but what you should do is actually be here, right? And I want to talk about what that means. So most people talk too much about their industry and avoid or ignore or don't talk about what is going on with culture. So on that respect, here's an example that'll paint a picture. There's a content creator by the name of LegalEagle, and he talks a lot about his industry. When he was starting out, he talked about how to take legal exams, the different legal codes, the different contracts you have to memorize and understand, civil procedure, all these things that are so in the weeds of the industry, which, as he was starting off his content and uploading some of these videos on YouTube, he'd get a decent following, people who would want to know about law school exams, how to get better grades, common mistakes, all of this stuff is very much on the right side of the industry Venn diagram, right? He was living here, talking a lot about the industry, not really commenting on culture too much. And when he started to move towards culture, which I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like in terms of content and execution, he started to see much greater results. And what that looks like is he took his same legal expertise and started thinking about, okay, how can I comment on pop culture through the lens of the law, right? So he reviewed Suits, he reviewed Better Call Saul, all these popular shows and movies, B-movie, Willy Wonka, Charlie Factory. So he talked about all these things that were already getting so much attention in culture, but put his lens on it and his audience ballooned. Look at these views, 2.5 million, 1.8 million, 1.6 million, 1.5 million. Just the view count was through the roof. And if you think about it, and you were to watch these videos, he actually mentions a lot of the same things that he did in these videos. But the fact is that because he's in the middle here, he's capturing more of people's mind share who weren't originally interested in law and either became interested or heard of him because they were searching for something that was trending at the time. And some people go way too far and take this point to the extreme, and they start being on this side of the culture Venn diagram. And I'd say, you really want to make sure you're in the middle, still comment on what's going on in your world, in your destination, as opposed to being in the being on the way side of culture. So that way you're in the middle at the end of the day, just like LegalEagle was, and you see a lot of those end results. And if I could share another example, Dr. Mike, he's another guy who didn't just focus on talking about his industry, he talked about culture as well. So he was in the middle of that Venn diagram. You can see he does a lot of the same thing, responding to Grey's Anatomy, Scrubs, thinking about what's the industry version of commenting on culture. So people are interested in both. People who are interested in both can come and consume your content. You could get a whole new group of people who are interested, as opposed to just talking about a dedicated section of it that may not draw as much interest. And if you look at it, here's a bonus tip. I recommend you use google.com/trends to understand what is trending in culture. Again, I'm all about trying to measure, the same idea with that headline tool, analyzer, that allows you to measure in terms of numbers. Let's measure trends in culture. If you take a look at those three shows that Dr. Mike was responding to, Grey's Anatomy, House, The Good Doctor, all of those things, you can see the search patterns on google.com/trends. All you have to do is type it in. You could toggle by the past 12 months, set your region, etc. And you see really, really granular results to make sure okay, you know what? At this point in time, it looks like the red line is highest. So House is something that is trendy in culture. I'm going to make sure my piece of content talks about my industry, but tries to comment on what's going on there. And if I had to go one step further, I'd ask this question, what if you can not only comment on culture, which is essentially what the strategy is, but also predict it? And this is where I'm so surprised more people don't know about this, because as you probably know, one of the things that gets the most views and most attention across the internet are these clips from different late night hosts like Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Fallon, etc. And what I found is that most people don't realize, let me move to the side here, most people don't realize that the calendars for these talk shows, right, are being put up online all the time. So you can see who their guests are. And another way of predicting culture or thinking about what can I comment on is taking a look at which stars are going to be in the news, right? And whether it's like Late Night with Seth Meyers and their upcoming guests, or Stephen Colbert, you could take a look at who their guests are, and if there's something to comment on about their lives or different projects. I know during 2020 a lot of those projects have been put on hold, but now production is kicking back up. I think using interbridge.com/lineups, the link I have here, again, another bonus tip, will help you really think ahead on what movies are going to be coming, what interviews are going to be coming out, and whether you could use that as a way to predict what's going to happen in culture, so you could comment on it and get the interest of the search engines or the different video platforms where you would benefit a lot from what not only people are watching, but also those recommendations, where if somebody watches an interview, let's say with a Keegan Michael Key, and you make a video about it as well, or talk about his some of his favorite places to travel, your video will start to be recommended against that one where he was on the Late Late Show with James Corden, just because those things always tend to get a lot of views because they're always embedded in culture. So just another thing to note, interbridge.com/lineups, another way to think about how can you comment on culture by thinking ahead and preparing your content, because I know that could take some time as well. And then lastly, I think about, just another fun example is, like predicting when movies are going to come out as like production comes back up. And in fact, there's this wonderful page, this channel called The Film Theorists, where, they talk about genetics, biology. Sometimes it's pretty dry stuff, but they always find a way to make it entertaining. And I thought that this was so genius, where they took a video that was about biology and Punnett squares, stuff that many of us probably forgot ever since our like biology classes in high school. And he talked about it in the realm of SpongeBob SquarePants, and how he had two different parents who, basically their Punnett squares and their genealogy led him to be square. And just guess how many views this video got. 9.4 million views about a video that's essentially about biology and genetics. Again, if it was just about biology and genetics, again, if it was in that industry part of the Venn diagram, it would get very little views. But because it was in the middle of industry and culture, just like you see here, that's a reason why it started to really take off, just like those other examples I shared. So I really encourage you to think about how can you find a way to comment on culture so you really start to get ahead when it comes to your content. And lastly, the thing I want to focus on to close this presentation is how can you focus on the apple and not just the orchard? And I know that sounds a bit weird, and I want to unpack what that means, because essentially, if I had asked you a series of questions to start out, I'd ask you, can you remember the last pie chart you saw? Or can you remember the last birthday you had? And the chances are that you're probably going to remember your last birthday over the last pie chart or spreadsheet that you looked at. And the reason why is that, I think it ties to this quote from Maya Angelou, who said, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never ever forget how you made them feel. And that's because I think stories speak louder than statistics. And this is coming from somebody from Silicon Valley, where people talk about big data, stats all the time. And I think they have their time and place, absolutely. We need metrics to make our decisions. But I think if you're talking about what's going to hook people in terms of marketing and content, it has to start with the story. It has to start with the memory. And this point here that I want to make, tying back to the name of this section, focusing on the apple and not the orchard, has to do with this. If I asked you to sell an apple orchard, which one of these following approaches would you take? Would you first talk about how the apple orchard had 32.21 inches of annual precipitation and had, a pH measurement of 7.1 and had 57 acres of trees? Again, would you take that approach if you were starting the conversation and trying to sell an apple orchard to somebody, right? Or would you just make them taste one apple? Right? Pluck it from the tree and say, hey, this is the apple from this orchard. And by the way, there's many more where that came from. So tell me what you think, taste it, and then we could talk numbers. Again, data and statistics still have their point, but starting with the apple as opposed to talking about all the nuances of the orchard is the way to go. And so many times I find people do this the opposite. And it gets them in trouble, and it gets people, it gets the engagement numbers low. And that's why I really, really want to emphasize that you got to start with the apple as opposed to orchard. And I want to show you how to do that. And again, that has to do with right brain, emotion, and imagination is how people like to start the conversation, as opposed to left brain, which is logic and reason, which comes into play afterwards. Again, research shows that decision-making processes start here. So as you're trying to attract people, get them to be interested, we really want to speak to the right brain. We really want to talk about the apple before the orchard. And if I had to give an example that really brings this home, around this time last year, or just a few years ago, I was taking a Uber home from work. And I called the Uber, and I got in the car, and lo and behold, this is the Uber driver that I had. I mean, he was fully stocked. It was like a vending machine on wheels. He had these M&Ms, Flamin' Hot Cheetos, Crunch bars, Snickers bars, the whole gamut. And I reached for the Flamin' Hot Cheetos because I love Flamin' Hot Cheetos. And he's like, that would be $1. And I was like, oh my God, this guy's upselling me inside his Uber. And at that point, I was just so impressed and also taken aback. And as I just got to see more and more drivers across San Francisco and the Bay Area, I got to see that there's a few people doing this. You know, there's people selling different baskets. I got in the car, they're trying to do that. And in fact, stand-up comedian Sebastian Maniscalco, I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right, one of my favorite comedians, has a whole bit where he talks about it. So I'll play just like 30 seconds of this clip because it's hilarious. So here we go.
Uber Black, that's another one, people. That's a better. You might get a sedan, an SUV. You ever get into that guy's car? He's so proud of his candy. As soon as you get in, I got candy if you want. I got it in the... I got gum, Jolly Rancher. I got iPhone 3, 4, 5, 6 charge. I got iPhone 9. It's not out, but I have if you need it. What? And they never just do Uber. They always got some side business. You ask them, how long? No, come on. I do this 12 hours a week, but my real business, I got a discotheque in Istanbul. What? The hell are you talking about?
That never gets old. And just like Sebastian mentioned, people have, you know, are Uber drivers, they have discotheques. Uber drivers have these in-car vending machines. But then I came across this one guy on another trip while I was in San Francisco, and he blew my mind. And I want to tell you the story about that Uber ride, because I got in the car, and all of a sudden I see this jewelry on the front of the dash. You can see that in this image. I see these bracelets that the driver's wearing, and I see, more importantly, these magazines that are in the front that say Gavin Escalar jewelry collection. And I looked at the name of the Uber driver and it said Gavin Escalar. And I'm like, are you the one who makes this jewelry? And he's like, yes, and you're sitting in my mobile showroom. And I couldn't believe it. He started telling me more about his business. He started talking about how he would very delicately and politely sell his jewelry in his car to high net worth clients who would take Uber. He actually had a fleet of other drivers who would drive Ubers and carry his jewelry collections in them, and also sell to their drivers, to their passengers. And if they did really well, he would upgrade them to have better cars so they could be in Uber Black and get better clients. And he did all of this after having a struggling jewelry business in a storefront in downtown San Francisco. They shut down to then use Uber not just as a transportation platform, but as a marketing platform. So I actually was so intrigued by that initial Uber ride that I was like, Gavin, I would love to write a story about you, and I would love to take some rides with you, see how you interact with customers. And I drove with him. He's very smart about not talking to like clients who are on the phone, or he'd have all these little signals, those things I mentioned, the jewelry, the magazine with his collection, where people would ask him, wait, is this you? Kind of like I did. And he would build his business that way, to the point where he was making, and there's another picture of us, to the point where he was making $252,000 a year. He showed me his books and all of that. And as I was thinking about writing this story, I asked myself, do I want to write about the orchard, or do I want to write about the apple? Do I want to find data about how many Uber drivers have side businesses and interview them, just like the candy man and the jeweler? Or do I just want to start by focusing on Gavin, dive deeper into his story as a Filipino immigrant, and then talk about how this is a greater trend that people are just starting to see at this time? And I even reached out to Uber for a comment. They gave me a quote, and I focused on the apple. And this article got 1.5 million views. And I call him the Uberpreneur, how an Uber driver makes $252,000 a year. And this thing blew up. And I don't think it would have done that if I focused on the orchard first. I think it's because I focused on the apple. And another thing I want to say is that think about how many other people were in that Uber in the past. In fact, there's over 2,000 passengers that Gavin Escalar, this driver, had, who didn't take the chance to pursue this story, which makes me think, how many people or how many customers have you come across that have a great story that maybe haven't had that story showcased yet? How many of those apples are out there that could really showcase your orchard, in other words? And I want to share another cool story that came from this, because again, I think focusing on the apple opened up all these doors. So after this article blew up, I got 2 phone calls. The first phone call came from CBS News. They wanted to feature the Uberpreneur story on the nightly news, and this is a clip, this is a screenshot from that. So that was really exciting that the nightly news was picking up on the story. But then I got a second call, and And if anybody has a guess as to who this call was from, I'd be shocked if you get this right, but I got a call from Tesla Motors, or more specifically, Gavin got a call. And they basically said, do you want to upgrade your showroom, Gavin, to a Tesla instead of the car he was driving at the time? And it wasn't Elon who called him. This is just the only image I could find, or the funniest image I could find. But Tesla asked him if he wanted to rent a Tesla for a few days or a week or so, and upgrade his showroom. So I thought it was so cool that everyone from the nightly news to Tesla was reaching out, in addition to 1.5 million people who heard about this story. So again, the benefits of focusing on the apple, not just the orchard. I encourage you to do that. So between focusing on the apple as opposed to the orchard, thinking about the Venn diagram and being in the middle of it, and then also thinking about how to E.A.T when it comes to crafting the headlines and the opening of your messages, I think there's a lot to remember here that I want to make as concrete and provide templates as tools. But really what it comes down to is, during this moment when there's so much change, let's make sure that we're not going about that change in the way that Bulova watches did, which is just slapping what happened before on what's going on in the future. Because taking a radio ad and putting it on TV is not going to cut it. And as all of us move to virtual and remote, really accelerate the adoption of digital marketing, I hope you think about how to use these 3 tips to really take advantage of that momentum swing. Because the real question is, if change is the only constant, then how will you change with the times? And if I could ever be helpful, I want to share my 2 accounts here. I actually have a YouTube account where I analyze different commercials and ads, talk more about marketing, and geek out on it. Also, I do the same on my Instagram account. But I also want to say, for this group, if I could ever be helpful, this is my email address. Don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always happy to help. I would love to hear from you. And let me know if there's ever any follow-up. And I hope to keep in touch. But more so, I want to bring myself back up here. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who attended. Hopefully you found this helpful and valuable. Again, if I could ever be a resource, don't hesitate to reach out. And hopefully next time we could catch up in person. And until then, I hope all of your families stay safe and well, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.
Woo! And the crowd goes wild! This is a blockbuster film. Thank you for being with us, Jon. Let's just jump.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, let's jump into a few questions. How's the weather in San Francisco, by the way?
It's always the same. You can't tell seasons here whatsoever.
The foggy city. All right, we are holding out for our first questions to come up on screen so I can ask them. If you could just give me a second there.
Perfect.
We're going to jump right in.
Amazing, amazing. You're doing a wonderful job hosting. I feel your energy from halfway across the world here.
Oh, thank goodness. Great. I hope the nerves aren't coming through across as well.
No, not at all.
Okay, here's
You're doing amazing.
here's our first question for you, Jon. How often should content be posted?
That's a great question. It totally depends on the platform, but I'm a big believer that quantity leads to quality. So if you are posting once a month, that's probably not enough for you to understand what your audience wants. And if I had to go even deeper to answer that question, I'd say start off by posting more regularly on the more forgivable formats. And what I mean by that is like an Instagram stories where it'll be gone in 24 hours. Use that as a place to post daily, but just not content of like, hey, this is my life today, this is what's going on. The diary stuff doesn't work as well. What I'd say you should post is stuff that asks your audience what they want to see more of in video form. So one thing that I love to do, for example, is just polling my audience by using Instagram's polling features, sticker features, quiz features. And I'll literally ask questions like, hey, do you want to see me post more videos about my insights on marketing and advertising campaigns? Do you want to see me post more about life at Instagram and what it's like on the inside? Do you want me to post more about how to grow on social media? Or do you want me to post more about other? and then people will vote in my audience. And then based on that, I'll decide what to post more of. And as of late, it's been people wanting to follow my Instagram, my LinkedIn for a lot of the marketing and advertising tips, which I thought was going to be different. I thought they would want to see like life behind the scenes or like, these big tech companies. But it just goes to show that if you poll your audience in these more forgivable formats, you could then ramp up your production on the feed and the video that are going to take more time to produce.
Right. Putting that in my pipe and smoking it. What is the what's the ideal length of a video?
Oh, wow. They totally depends again on format. But I'd say let's break it down into some of the most popular formats right now, right? If it is Instagram Reels, then we're talking about, trying to get the loop going as much as possible, right? So thinking about like if it's, Instagram just recently updated to 60 seconds, but if you don't feel like your video could get people to loop and makes it engaging and people are going to dial off, then you should probably make it shorter. But again, I think that the best way to do this is by listening to your audience. Go into graph, whether it's on Instagram, on YouTube, or TikTok. How long are people staying when I post my videos? If they're not staying until the end and you're posting a 45-second video, you should probably bring that number down until you see that the retention's high. So try that permission from your audience, take a look at your analytics, and I think that will give you a better insight as to how long you should be posting versus blanket statements like 34 seconds across all platforms, which is definitely not one size fits all.
Okay. But concentration span, though, what do you feel is the time that people really like? I mean, besides the whole format deciding, how do you feel people generally respond to video?
Say that one more time in terms of presentation length.
Yeah, like just the length. Yeah, just in terms of length. So it's not about the concentration span of the people, because I know some people go in quickly, get out quickly.
So when it comes to like a presentation, I think, I know there's a lot of research about how 18 minutes is like the max time span that people have an attention for. And that's why like a lot of other, academics have started to give like breaks to students after 18 minutes because they know that's the most, information that can be packed in at any given sitting. So I'd say if you're looking for presentation and more long form, or even like videos that are on platforms like YouTube, definitely going to be more sit down and lean back experiences than let's say Instagram that's more lean in and snackable. 18 minutes is a good guideline to look at. But again, taking a look at your metrics and seeing what your audience wants is going to be the gold standard because it'll differ by industry and different audience size based on how big you are and your social media following.
Cool, thank you. Should the same content be used across the different social media platforms or be dedicated?
Oh, that is a fantastic question. And the answer changes as you grow. When you're starting out, I'd say absolutely. Repurposing content, so many people get overly precious about it. They're like, I'm just starting out. I'm going to post something different on Instagram versus Snap versus Twitter versus Facebook, etc. And all of a sudden they're managing 6 different types of content and they stop posting any of them because it gets overwhelming. Versus just thinking about, okay, if I'm going to put a post up on Instagram, there's a good chance that it'll probably do well on LinkedIn because static posts and text are still performing well, as well as Facebook. So there's no harm in reposting that. And I know people may be thinking, well, John, what if my audience sees the same thing twice on different platforms? And the truth of the matter is that these platforms have become so mature, there's different people going to them at different times. And even if they see a post twice, it's actually very unlikely that they'll unfollow you and may even be more likely to engage with you because they've been primed on one platform to see that content. And then once they see it for a second time, they'll actually pay attention. So no harm in repurposing when you're starting out. In fact, it makes it more efficient. And I'd say there's a great opportunity right now to repurpose between Reels, YouTube Shorts, and TikTok because they're very similar. But as you grow, you want to be as original as possible. And that's where, your content spending budget can go up. You could be more original, and that will give you a better chance of, taking off on one platform versus the other. But if you're starting out, absolutely, I recommend repurposing.
Now, if something is something negative is trending culturally. Is it a good idea to maximize on that with an industry message of support, for example?
It depends on where you want to play. I think that part of the presentation that I really try to hone in on is that virality Venn diagram. So if there is something negative going on, but you don't feel like you could really elevate or add to the conversation, it's probably worth, thinking about, okay, if I can't add to it, and if it doesn't really align to like what my brand is trying to do, then is this the right moment for us to take part in the conversation? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I think like more so like just focusing on the product and taking advantage of those like moments where you could speak out and align with your brand may make the most sense. Again, there's definite moments where like so many things are going on in society that if you don't speak up, you become almost like an apathetic bystander, and you don't want to do that. But by and large, I think it really depends on what your past brand messaging has been and whether that overlap in your Venn diagram exists.
Our next question, waiting for that to come up. Hosting competitions on social media platforms mostly draws the wrong type of people, meaning not necessarily the ones that would buy or support the business. So how do you go about that? Because the point of it is to get new customers.
Whoever asked that question is smart, because I've seen so many people try to do giveaways or sweepstakes, which, by the way, get really complicated with terms of service on a lot of these different platforms. You want to make sure to read the fine print, because I've seen people do different sweepstakes or giveaways and get their, put their account like in a timeout. So first, you want to make sure you're reading the terms of services. Secondly, like it's not a great long-term strategy for the most part. A lot of times when you bring these folks who are in for the giveaways or are tagged by friends, most of the time they won't engage because they're not there for the original content that you're posting. They're just there for a free giveaway. And most times you'll be spending a lot of money on those, and it's not always beneficial. What I do like doing instead of giveaways, just to spin this question in a positive direction, is if you're given a brand deal or a sponsorship, most times brands will just send you one item for yourself. One thing that I love doing and love recommending creators to do is saying, hey, I know you want to send me this product. Maybe it's like a desk, maybe it's a face cream. Can you send me 5 more of those so I could give it to my audience and let them experience why I want to advocate for this product as much as I do? And in that way, it makes it, hey, I'm winning with my community, not showcasing and showboating about the fact that I got a free product and a brand deal.
Okay. I love this next question because I've seen this fall flat. What's your take on using humor? How do we best establish the tone for our content?
I think humor is such an important part of any content, and I'd recommend if you haven't already, I recommend this book called The Humor Code that really breaks down how to be funny and the different methods of copywriting that allow you to be humorous, even if you think you're not the most funny person in the room, even if your brand typically doesn't go down that line. But I think humor just puts people's guards down. It allows you to be a bit self-deprecating. It allows a message just to stick and be more memorable, because nowadays it's not just about educating people, it's entertaining them at the same time. So I think humor is a must, but finding your own take on it is important. So I'm all for it. And the humor code is a great way to, just be a bit more research and science about it if it doesn't come as naturally for you or your brand.
Okay. Are Reels the new route to success on Instagram? Are stories and posts going to become redundant, per se?
Not redundant, but here's the way I think about Instagram as a whole. You have 5 surfaces, right? Feed, stories, live, IGTV, and most recently, Reels. You have to consider which of those 5 surfaces are best for growth and which of those 5 services are best for engagement and ultimately monetization. The best services for engagement are stories, feed, and IGTV, which has recently launched RevShare, where there's now ads being placed in IGTV videos, so you can start making money similar to YouTube's RevShare programs. But in terms of growth, the biggest opportunities are Reels and live. And with live, before I touch on Reels and answer the question, live, like a lot of people aren't using this feature enough. It's not just a normal go live and engage with your audience. It's going live with up to 3 other people. And if you do that, you're able to get notifications sent to everybody's audience at once, go to the front of the stories tray, and get a lot of visibility. I try to, like every few weeks, host a live session on my Instagram called Creators Office Hours. And when I do that, I invite different folks to come on stage and ask questions. And every time that they do, a notification gets sent out to their audience. And more people come in, more people come in, more people come in. And it's just a great way to create an engaging format, but also one that leads to growth. But Reels is definitely one of the best levers today. And you have to just think about it from a real estate perspective in terms of the app. When you look at your app and you look at Instagram, take a look at what's at the bottom there in terms of the Reels tab. Instagram is putting a dedicated space on their digital real estate for Reels, which is causing more people to look at Reels and consume them. So if consumption is going up, then there needs to be, supply going up as well. And supply is obviously what you guys as creators and brands would put into the ecosystem. And because it's new, not as many people are posting Reels right now. So there's an imbalance of tons of eyeballs, but not as many pieces of content. So if you post more, you'll see that there's a great opportunity for growth. And, that's something that Reels is really well optimized to do. And there's less competition because it's just such a younger format versus feed that has been around for ages, or stories that just goes out to your existing following.
Do hashtags really work?
They do work, but if you're obsessing over trying to find the most perfect hashtags and putting in so many of them that you forget about the actual post, then they're probably working against you. But yes, there are definitely things that get taken into account when trying to factor in for discovery. But just be careful not to make it just such a scientific and academic exercise that your content begins to suffer as a result.
Okay. How can we navigate around situations where your post is absolutely engaging, but the comment section is filled with customer complaints?
I think, I always like to look for patterns and trends. So if there's a lot of complaints, there's probably some truth in it too, right? And I think I'm a big believer of treating your community as a focus group and also asking for that input. Now, I think there's a difference between constructive criticism and hateful messages. And if you start to see a lot of that, Instagram and a lot of other platforms, YouTube has great moderation tools in terms of taking out certain words, deleting certain comments, banning certain folks, because at the end of the day, it's your safe space, it's your community. So if you see a lot of those comments, there's definitely moderation tools that I recommend using to keep a safe and positive community. But if you start seeing a trend of certain comments and customer complaints about a product, that's actually a great opportunity to look at, maybe this is something that we should address and update next time we launch or ship it. So I think those are the 2 ways to look at it and the tools that I was specifically used in answering that question.
Cool. So protect your peace. Now we're going to go into our last question. If I could have that, please. Just waiting for it to come up here.
All good. All good.
All right. So we've already asked this question that they've just put up for me, just asking them to... All right, we're getting the next question up. Catchy headlines. Catchy headlines are very important for any piece of content, right? So what about other catchy headlines that are misleading?
Catchy headlines that are misleading ultimately will just bite you in the rear. And I say that because most people think too short term when it comes to clickbaiting headlines. A clickbaiting headline is just a way of diminishing trust with your customer and end user. So if for the first time, you're putting out that headline and it's misleading, it'll get clicks. But in the future, it'll ultimately lead to people not trusting what's going to be behind that piece of content and therefore not clicking on it as much, even if you're going to deliver on the value. So I'd say be very, very careful when it comes to over promising and use the tools that I mentioned in terms of the headline analyzer, the templates. I hope you got screenshots. If you didn't, send me a DM, and I'm happy to share like the templates. But use those and make sure that you're being very, very diligent about the headlines, because every time that you over deliver value, you build trust, and every time you over promise and under deliver, you lose trust by clickbaiting. So it's a really, really important dynamic to keep in mind, and a fantastic question. I'm glad you asked it.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time, Jon Youshaei. Starstruck, but happy.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.